Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine, and we are brought to you today by the Hamilton School at the University of Florida, because at a time when American higher education has lost its way, the Hamilton School at the University of Florida is setting a new standard, offering an elite education that's anything but elitist. Led by world-class scholars, Hamilton is reviving the classical liberal arts tradition, grounded in the great works of Western civilization and the founding principles of the American Republic. In small, discussion-based classes, students study history, philosophy, economics, literature, and America's founding texts, developing the discipline, eloquence, and moral confidence to lead with purpose in their careers, their communities, and their lives. Learn more at hamilton.ufl.edu/commentary. That's hamilton.ufl.edu/commentary. The Hamilton School at the University of Florida, leading a revolution in higher education. Joining me today, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
So just as we were about to start this podcast, bulletin from the New York Times: Epstein alleged in emails that Trump knew of his conduct. In a message obtained by Congress, the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein wrote that Donald J. Trump spent hours at his house with one of Epstein's victims. Interestingly enough, the subhead refers to Epstein as Mr. Epstein. I believe that the style book that I was taught under says you don't use Mr. for a convicted felon, but I guess maybe the New York Times has gone another way in this regard. And of course, Epstein also
it defaults to doctor.
Defaults to doctor. Okay. I wanted to lead with the podcast, not because I think that this piece has any kind of smoking gun in this sense. We knew that Trump and Epstein had a relationship. We knew that that relationship ended at some point. But these emails that the Times cite, which were gotten by Democrats in Congress and leaked to them, are from 2011, 2015, and 2019. The ones in 2015 and 2019 appear to be between Epstein and Michael Wolff, the sleazebag pseudo-biographer and general New York slime bucket, who seems to be advising Epstein while trashing Trump or then praising Trump. And, it's like getting into a bath of feces when you start mentioning Michael Wolff. Nonetheless, he is one of the people on the other side of these emails. And secondarily, an email between Ghislaine Maxwell, his procurer, obviously now in a federal prison, a nicer federal prison than she was in a couple months ago, talking about how Trump was the dog in the attacks on him in 2011. Epstein tells Ghislaine Trump was the dog that didn't bark, and that at least one of his victims spent hours with Trump at Epstein's house. Thoughts? Don't everybody jump in at once.
All right, I'll jump in. Provided that I literally just finished reading the story. I don't see how this changes anything. It doesn't appear to me to contradict anything Trump has said previously. He said he knew Epstein. He said they had a falling out around 2004. He's given, to this point, somewhat different explanations of why that falling out happened. He basically said he thinks Epstein was a sleazebag and that he hired women away from Mar-a-Lago. He kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago. Said he knew him the way everyone in Palm Beach knew him, which may mean, and probably did mean, that everybody in Palm Beach thought the guy was a scumbag. I mean, his conduct seems to have been fairly widely known. And then I think the key passage in the New York Times story is the following. In an email from January 2019, Mr. Epstein wrote to Mr. Wolff of Mr. Trump, of course he knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. That seems to actually cast Trump in a positive light.
Well, we don't know what we don't know what
we don't know what it
this is
means, but
referring to.
that's how it lands with me. I'm just sort of responding
He
this
knew about
to
the girls because he asked Ghislaine to stop soliciting the girls to him. That would be the positive one, right? He's like, Ghislaine, leave me alone with
right.
these underage girls. You're sickening me. Or it could be,
I mean,
Ghislaine,
he certainly
stop.
didn't write. He didn't ask Ghislaine to keep sending them. He
Right.
asked
Yeah.
Ghislaine to,
Right. Yeah.
send them younger and prettier.
Yeah. Okay. Why now? Why is this out now? What is going on?
Well, the main thing is that it coincides with the discharge petition, right? I mean, that's kind of the now that Democrats are going to have
I'm just an unfrozen caveman lawyer.
Yeah,
Please explain
right.
to
So
me
now
this
that Democrats are going now that Democrats are going to have their a congresswoman who was not sworn in during the shutdown, but who was elected to office, she's going to be sworn in because of the number of Republicans who support a petition to release the Epstein files, to force Trump to release all the Epstein files, whatever that means. She becomes the 218th vote. The House now has a majority because there's a number of Republicans who also want, them to release the Epstein files. Tom Massey has been part of this group that Trump is supporting a primary against him, and so there's enough Republicans now. Discharge petition. The discharge petition just sort of triggers other votes, other procedural votes. It's a multi-step procedural process, but the point is that the Trump White House now has to fight procedurally a petition from the House to release the Epstein files. And so this seems time. I mean, I don't know. I just read the story, a few minutes ago. I didn't process it, but the timing itself, as the question, seems to be to enable the push forward of this. Now that starting today, there will be some sort of legal political process that the president is going to have to beat in order to keep these files secret.
The House has come back into session in order to pass the opening of the government. And Mike Johnson has agreed after 8 weeks to swear in this congresswoman from Arizona. And so the House is now back, and that procedure can move forward. So if you are a conspiracy theorist of the right or the left, or just an ordinary person who finds everything relating to Epstein to stink to high heaven, and the whole thing makes you uncomfortable, which I put myself in that camp, weird things have been going on all year. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, and Kash Patel, the FBI Director, both in the course of their political lives over the last year or 2 years said they would release all the Epstein files. And then when they assumed office, said, we've looked through them, there's nothing there, we're not releasing them in order to protect the identities and the privacy of the victims who do not deserve to have their names and whatever they were out in the open. They participated in 2008 in testimony and other things against Epstein. And no, it's nobody's business who they are, and we're just telling you, having looked at them, that there's nothing there. Now, of course, imagine that Biden was the president, or Harris was the president, and announced that these files would never be released. Out of office, Kash Patel and Pam Bondi would be having a cow saying, "Oh, they're covering up for everybody who took a plane trip to Sex Slave Island." All of their people, Bill Clinton and Alan Dershowitz. I'm not saying that they went, by the way. So I just want to I want to immunize ourselves from prosecution or being sued. I'm saying this is what they would say, that they're protecting the Democratic elite from getting into trouble. Now they're in power, and they're the ones who have said they were not going to do what they had promised to do, which is release all of this material, thus giving rise to a new kind of leftist conspiracy theorizing relating to Epstein, which is that they're covering for Trump, that there is stuff in the files about Trump and Republicans that they are now in a position to suppress. And that is why leftists and left-wing congressmen are joining with conspiracy-minded right-wing congressmen in the desire to release this material that otherwise we would never see because it's under seal. Part of legal proceedings that were resolved, and in part of the resolution of those proceedings, the records were under seal, and they do involve people who were underage at the time that this material was collected. So here's what's interesting to me. I'm now going to do the my wife thing. There's a whole thing where people in journalism say my wife heard, and that's like, okay, so my wife said to me last week, I haven't been following this really closely, but I was out with somebody who said, well, the reason that the Republicans want the government to stay shut down is because they're trying to hide the release of the Epstein files. And that is why the Republicans want the shutdown. And she said to me, I don't understand this. And I said, well, you're right not to understand it, because the Republicans don't actually want the government to be shut down. They want the government to be open. But this is a line that was being proffered on crooked media and, MSNBC shows and all of that there is an esoteric motive for the shutdown, which is to hide the Epstein material that once it comes out will destroy everybody. So that's part of this story that is of interest to me, that in the bubbling reaches of the left-wing conspiracist world, they think there's a smoking gun in these papers. And even if there isn't a smoking gun, and with the New York Times story, which you guys can read the minute you can read it while we're talking if you're near a computer or whatever, doesn't have a smoking gun. It does say Trump, Epstein, Trump, Epstein. Epstein says Trump, Trump is there, Trump, Trump, Epstein, and that may be all that is needed.
I mean, but if when you talk about timing, I mean, to my mind, if you are a Trump detractor on the right or the left, or you're an Epstein scandal enthusiast, there's never a bad time for a story like this to break. I mean, it's you're happy to drip out any piece from any file, any time, to make any sort of insinuation, and then everyone goes off and analyzes, tries to read the tea leaves, and no one gets to anything. I mean, it will not be the last time. It won't be the last time this year that we will get some new piece of information like this.
I guess my question, I don't mean to be glib about this. Epstein was a creep and a criminal. But I'm reading the Times story carefully now, and the first paragraph says that these email messages, suggested that the convicted sex offender believed Mr. Trump knew more about his abuse than he has acknowledged. I mean, if that is the upshot here, like, who cares? So Trump knew more than he's publicly acknowledged. I mean, that's supposed to be a breaking news. I guess I would assume Trump knows a bit more than he's acknowledged. Like, who cares? Who cares?
I care.
I don't really care.
I care a little. When I said that I'm in this weird third camp of extreme.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think it's going to be some big scandal. Like, Trump himself has been put on trial for sexual misconduct. Like, this is going to be a pale,
Okay. The Epstein story is the story that it is, and will remain a story for as long as we are alive and will be revived every couple of years by another book and another investigation and that sort of thing, because of the circumstances surrounding his prosecution, his plea, his second prosecution, and then his death, all of which have mysteries and weirdnesses surrounding them that are inexplicable and impossible to sort through, right? Why did the government agree to a plea deal in 2008 when they had him dead to rights? Why did, why did Leon Black of Apollo pay him $158 million for tax advice, which is roughly $140 million more for tax advice than anybody has ever been paid for tax advice? Why did Leslie Wexner of The Limited give him a $70 million house in Manhattan? Why did Melinda Gates say that one of the primary reasons she divorced Bill Gates was his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? What were these flights to the island that he had parties on? And of course, once he was convicted a second time and was in the Brooklyn Correctional Institution, how was it that the cameras were off and the guys were asleep and all of that, and he was on suicide watch, and then he managed to commit suicide anyway? People I genuinely and deeply respect, like Bill Barr, who was then Attorney General, said he looked into it and that the suicide was legit. In other words, that he did commit suicide and nobody did it to him. But at the tail end of this entire 11-year saga of Jeffrey Epstein's behavior and wandering around in the world of the American elites in some very strange fashion with an investment company that almost no one worked for, and dying with an estate with $560 million in cash, not in stocks and bonds and this and that, in cash. And then Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction as a part of the sex offenses. Nothing adds up. That doesn't mean that Trump's involved or not involved, but you cannot. This story is the story of our time. It is going to be the unsolved crime of our time, and every time has some famously unsolved crime or unsolved mystery that never goes away. Judge Crater's disappearance, Amy Semple McPherson's disappearance. Who was Jack the Ripper? Did Lizzie Borden kill her parents? I mean, there are these legendary crimes that we never get to the bottom of. And this is the legendary crime of our time. And so this story can never end, in my view, unless the dam breaks and somebody, like in a Perry Mason episode, said, yes, I did it. I procured it. And Ghislaine Maxwell steps out and then lays it out at the end of a horrible, TV show or something where they just
I want to see Ghislaine Maxwell pull a Wolf Blitzer in Mission Impossible. Pull off the mask. Yeah. Let's see who's underneath that. No, I mean, it's also the story of our time, because our time just gets more conspiracist, right? I mean, there's not necessarily evidence that society has become more given to conspiracy theories over, the past however many years, but public life, I think it's impossible to deny that public life has, that the public discourse has, the public political discourse has become more conspiracist, right? Aside from whether we're saying, people believe more than they used to or whatever. And the internet spreads that discourse. And so, Trump is really at the center of it. I mean, Trump was on the subject of conspiracy theories. He really was the band leader for the right's, march of the conspiracists a decade and a half ago when Obama was still in office, because he managed, in one of the most dispiriting scenes I can remember in my adult life, he managed to provoke the sitting president of the United States into producing a birth certificate and giving, a statement on camera about it. And it was like, well, that's how far this thing has gone, right? So Trump was really good at riling people up and making sure that these things stick and you never hear the end of it, whatever. But from there, we did get into a whole era where the right was particularly concerned about human trafficking. I mean, we're still in that era, but the point is that post Obama birth certificate, everything this conspiracist community took on an immediately took on the fight over human trafficking, the trafficking of minors, for the sexual gratification of people in power. And that's really where we are. And Trump did nothing to discourage that, obviously. But if anything, he always sort of liked being this, this kochleffel, this whip spoon, and stirring things up, this pot stirrer. And I think that this is, in a lot of ways, this is chickens coming home to roost on him, because he has made the atmosphere of conspiracy thinking so legitimate and legitimized that he can't wave it away. And also this fits the kind of stuff that he was, egging on, which is, underage children are being trafficked for the gratification of powerful people.
This is a very, very important point that, Trump brought a certain type of, look, we've been living in a time in which the idea is that there is a story behind the story since the Kennedy assassination. You guys, I was 2 when Kennedy was assassinated. You guys weren't born yet, but since 1963, an enormous number of American people believe that they have been fed lies about unbelievably important things, and then there were little bits of pieces along the way to support this as a general proposition, right? The Pentagon Papers suggesting that the military knew that it was losing in Vietnam and was not being square and straight with the American people about the condition of the battle as it was being, or the battles as they were being fought, on and on, these sort of the story behind the story. And then something 9/11, people start believing conspiracies that are clearly untrue. A missile hit Flight 800 in 1996. 9/11 was an inside job. Steel can't melt, fire can't melt steel, or whatever. That we deliberately went to war in Iraq for false purposes, which, by the way, no one has ever been able to convincingly explain to me what the purpose of going to war in Iraq was for false purposes. What was it? What were Bush? What were they all getting out of it by doing this, right? And then the fact that the 2008 financial meltdown featured people like Chuck Prince of Citibank and others saying things like, well, we knew it was all going to collapse, but it was all a question of how long we were going to keep dancing until the last minute when we could profit from it, sell off to some moron, and then watch the world burn while we made money off it. Then you go to Trump, the birth certificate, and the child trafficking, and we have a world in which everybody's got at least one conspiracy that they believe in, right? I think everybody, as I say, my conspiracy that I believe in is that Epstein did not kill himself. I have no evidence. I don't know anything. There's something about it. That's my one. Everybody gets one. There were people who were buying this idea that in the basement of Comet Pizza, they were harvesting children's adrenochrome to keep Hillary Clinton alive. And a guy came to Washington with guns to break into Comet Pizza on Connecticut Avenue to save the children from the adrenochrome factory. And then upon learning that, he had been sold a bill of goods, like in this courtroom, he was like, I don't know what happened. I went insane. I believed things that were being told to me that were clearly and patently untrue, and something went wrong in my brain. So this is a 3-generation problem here. And yeah, Trump benefited from it. Trump created the counter narrative approach to becoming a leading candidate for president. And maybe, as Seth, you suggest, this is the price that he is paying for it.
I mean,
Is that
there
yeah,
are
go
also
ahead.
conspiracies that I think we could say were real. The conspiracy to delegitimize Hunter Biden's laptop as an actual piece of evidence.
Yeah, the February 2nd
Yeah,
meeting of the COVID people who decided to suppress information suggesting that the United States government was in fact supporting gain of function research when it said
exactly.
when it was not when it was not allowed to under congressional statute, and then to destroy everybody who said otherwise.
Right.
Right? That February 4th, I can't remember, some date in February when this weird
Mind meld. Yeah.
mind meld that said that it was a naturally occurring and not lab engineered virus.
Right.
We still, by the way, don't know whether it was naturally occurring or whether it was lab engineered. I mean, we're still not there yet.
Right.
But the idea that anybody who said that it was lab engineered and that it escaped should have their reputations destroyed, yeah, that was a real conspiracy. And the Hunter Biden laptop, the 51 national security officials who said that it was disinformation. I love that, by the way, that an object is disinformation. No one ever quite parsed that either, right? An object of disinformation. Anyway, right. So yeah, there are conspiracies. There always have been conspiracies.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we're just scratching the surface. You know, the Epstein case is a mainstream conspiracy. The rest of the world, or the right, they're heading like Candace Owens word. You know, like they're all sort of drifting into much stranger, crazier, deeper, all explaining conspiracies. So yeah,
right.
Right. I mean, at one point, I think I mentioned this in the piece I wrote on the influencers on the right, but Candace Owens at one point mentioned the Israelis in part of her rant about her theory that the First Lady of France was born a man. And that there was some, she suggested some sort of Israeli blackmail thing. So yeah, I mean, they are looking for the one, this is the one weird trick community. They're looking for the one thing, the singularity that answers it all, and it's kind of frightening to watch it because as conspiracy theories do, they move in one direction.
So I'm reminded, I've mentioned this before, that other societies have functioned in this fashion to some degree, right? In which you could basically say that there is a taste for this idea that elites need private spaces to meet, to get together, to do things together, out of sight, to sort of help manage the world better than the world would manage itself. This is kind of the idea behind the late 19th century passion for things that still exist into the 21st, like the secret societies at Yale or the eating clubs at Princeton or places like that. Young elite people need to develop social relationships out of the view of general society so that they can manage the world together as a kind of natural aristocracy. That's what clubbing is about. That's what, that's not even a conspiracy theory. That's like a real thing that was actually sort of preached as a doctrine, by social Darwinists at the end of the 19th century. And there is the great, one of the 3 or 4 greatest novelists, Honoré de Balzac. His 37 novel cycle, The Human Comedy, posits that there is a conspiracy in French society of 13 people who run everything. that is the sort of the key fact of the world of Paris and French society that he is portraying in this interlocking series of novels. And they're novels, so you can say he made it up out of whole cloth, but these are the wisest, smartest, most sophisticated books practically ever written about the workings of society, and it's probably fair to assume that he was onto something, right? These in this non-democratic, non-entirely monarchical, weird society that was made up of all kinds of different elements. So it's not like conspiracies don't exist, the conspiracy theories don't happen, all of that. It's a lifelong thing. And so, but in the annals of America, Trump is the first politician to build his foundation on a conspiracy theory. The foundation of his political career was the birth certificate, right? Which was Obama was cooked in a lab to become president of the United States 47 years later by having been born in Kenya, by somehow having been transshipped from Kenya to Hawaii in 2 days in 1961, which wouldn't have been possible, having this birth certificate somehow filed in there, then lost, blah, all of that, because somehow in 1961 people knew that it would be great to have the name Barack Hussein Obama to run for president in 2008. It never made any sense, but it was the core of his political emergence, and so, yeah, here we are 14, 15 years later, or 13 years later, and he's now on the receiving end of the kinds of things that he believes.
And his lame duck status, although is not the main driver of this, but the idea that his time is passing as leader of the movement, right? And there's the sort of Game of Thrones for for who's going to be his heir on the right. You see, these guys are not moved by appeals to leave Trump alone, right? I mean, we've seen this week, Nick Fuentes and those guys, like, they'll go right at the administration. That part of this new attitude is to be authentic. You will go at anyone. You're not part of, MAGA. You're not part of this or that. You just are, and you're a missile, and you're going to hit whatever you're fired at. And so that also really works against Trump in this way too, with the Epstein stuff, because people don't feel a sense of, oh, leave the guy alone. What if we don't win an election? There's the mentality of the conspiracist right, especially, has moved beyond any sort of electoral considerations or party considerations or anything like that. And so there's nothing really to protect him.
It's also fun. Like this, I'm sorry to say, because it's demonic and barbaric and evil. But is there a more sheerly fun story in American politics than what was going on with Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, it is, everybody gets to play.
I was just thinking back to the Trump Obama birth certificate thing, and it's really interesting. It does capture Trump's genius. This is before Trump was a political figure. He was just a business guy. And so it was in 2011, and he was able to play on this sense among conservatives that it wasn't that Obama was cooked in a lab. It was that he didn't really like America. Why is this guy taking shots at our country all the time? And then, like, the matter of his name, like, the guy has a funny name, and he has his father was born in Kenya.
His father was Kenyan. His
father was Kenyan, and so Trump's was doing the just asking questions thing. Like, what's so hard about just, if you're born here, show us your birth certificate? And I was the producer for Sean Hannity at the time, and Trump leveraged his relationships the way he does now with the media to make this like a headline story on Fox News. And I remember, doing the show every day. Like, this was the top block of a primetime show on Fox News because the thing rated. And Trump would call in. I mean, he was the guest, and it was something people wanted to watch, but it was world-class trolling.
Right.
And the Epstein thing has a lot of the same characteristics where, John, I mean, when you talked about it, it was like something just doesn't sit right about this with people. Like, there's something funny going on here.
It rates, and Epstein rates.
Right.
And, these stories rate. And Tucker Carlson's entire career as a podcaster, as a result of being fired by Fox, is created on a platform. And the platform is everything that they have been telling you about the 20th and 21st centuries is a lie. World War II was fought on the basis of a lie. The idea that Christians should have a theological, many Christians have a theological reason that they would support the existence of the state of Israel and the flourishing of Israel is a lie. This is a lie. I'm bringing on this guy to say, no, Maduro is fine. The Russian subway system is better than the American subway system. There's no crime in Russia. There's no, this, that, the other thing. The whole thing is based on, come to me for a counter history of the world that we're living in, and I will supply you with endless amounts of information that say that everything that you were ever told is untrue. And that's Fuentes also, and Candace Owens, who seems to be doing it with startling rapidity, in which she will change what the story that wasn't true was today from the story that wasn't true yesterday. And clearly, it's a nation of 330 million people. If Nick Fuentes can get 1 million people to listen to him, that's one 330th of the country. But I'll tell you what, that's more people than watch CNN right now. I mean, that's part of the story also, is that the official story, or the way in which news is reported in America, has completely lost the confidence of everybody else also. So it's not as though, we can ignore this because while 1 million people are listening to Nick Fuentes or, believing some Kennedy conspiracy theory about the assassination, 40 million people every night are watching Walter Cronkite, and that's the sort of the more responsible way that news is gathered and reported is the overwhelming way in which people get information. But that's not true anymore. As many people listen to Tucker Carlson as watch, I don't know, the BBC NewsHour on PBS, or watch PBS NewsHour or something like that. So there is no establishment news. So the counter history starts, at least numerically, being just as valid as the official story.
And that's before we get into the generational question, because then, there are people who grew up watching Walter Cronkite who now are on the Tucker Fuentes train. What about the people who grew up knowing nothing other than a world of counter history, than podcasts, Gen Alpha? This is, as far as they're concerned, this is the news. That's the news.
Well, we're talking Walter Cronkite, but remember that a key moment in the destruction of the reputation of the news business came 21 years ago, when Walter Cronkite's successor, Dan Rather, bought into a fabricated conspiracy theory about how George W. Bush got out of military service, and broadcast it on the Tiffany network, CBS, using a fabricated letter that it took a single blogger typing it into his computer to realize had been composed in a typeface that did not exist in the year the letter was supposedly written. So Dan Rather was the anchor of the CBS Evening News, and he was gone in 10 days. And to this day, Rather has not disavowed that story.
It
To
took a
this
little
day,
longer than 10 days, but
was it longer?
yeah,
Oh,
it took a long time to get Rather out, but eventually his producers, and Mary Mapes was the producer, and Rather was pushed into early retirement. And it's true, he has never disavowed that story.
He's
He says
94 years old or
even
something.
if the documents themselves were fraudulent, the story was true. And he's now back in good odor, being cited by mainstream journalists to decry Barry Weiss's ascension to CBS News because he says she's going to dishonor the organization.
My
My
favorite Dan
is,
Rather appearances were when he would go on reliable sources, and he would be sitting there. There would be a big sign that said "reliable sources" behind Dan Rather.
So, because he was part of the destruction, this thing I'm about to pose is by definition nonsensical.
Well,
But
I think
Rather did this today, I don't think he would have to resign.
It's interesting because Rather happened in 2004, and it was essentially on the eve of the 2004 election, in which
8 weeks. Yeah.
Bush and Cheney were running for re-election against Kerry and Edwards. And
Edwards, good pull. Look at you. I bet you there isn't 90% of this audience could not pull John Edwards' name out when asked who ran with John Kerry.
Unforgettable. But Rather revealed, I think, for so many of us who had, I was a sophomore or junior in college. For so many of us who had seen media bias, felt media bias, that the top journalists in their fields were journalism was the practice of politics, and it was politics by other means. And Rather was using 60 Minutes to try to defeat George W. Bush in the re-election campaign, and using nefarious means to do it. And now it's just Trump's ascension and Trump's naked attacks on the press allowed the press to say, well, he's attacking the First Amendment and the Constitution, so it's okay for us to drop the veil and attack him back. And now this is happening much more out in the open. But 2004 was a turning point in all of that.
I mean, John, you said if Dan Rather had done this today, he would be able to keep his job. I'm thinking of, if this is the direction the conversation is going in about this, media falsehoods and whatnot. There was a point over the summer where every single major media organization ran fake photos of sick kids and said they were being starved by Israel. Forget that it's an anti-Semitic story. Forget that it's a political story. Forget that it's the Israel story about the Jews. It is a story. It was the announcement of the total eradication of media standards. That was it. That was, to me,
right. You're right, and
there's little reason to believe anything after that.
Right.
Abe, doesn't it go back? I'm sure we could find a million examples, but we mentioned earlier in the show the letter from the 51 intelligence officials saying that the Hunter Biden laptop is Russian disinformation. And we now know that to have been organized by Tony Blinken,
right,
working for the Biden campaign. And there's no note if you go back on that article, which was published by Politico. And in fact, it's not only that the authors of such reports are not penalized or don't have to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It's that they've been promoted. They've ascended to new heights in the profession. So I think you're right to say, John, that nothing would happen today.
Well, except
that's actually a really interesting point to make, though, because Eliana, what you're beyond the whether there's punishment and consequences, what you're pointing out is if someone were doing research on Russia related matters, they would find all these stories. There wouldn't be, these stories haven't been removed. They haven't had corrections. And I mean, some I'm sure have been correct, but there aren't notes on every, Russiagate story or whatever about this. If someone were going out through history to write this era, and they went out on the internet and they would find all these mainstream outlets. They could do their research on CNN and New York Times and all these other like mainstream outlets, and they might reconstruct the exact same Russiagate story that turned out to be highly deficient, to say the least. But if you told somebody, tell me what happened in this period between Trump and Russia, they might scour the archives of all our major institutions and come back with, oh, he was blackmailed, there was a tape, there was a this, and that's the thing, is that they've sort of left all this. It's not even residue, it's just all still there.
We can go back in time on that. There was an issue 20 years ago. People who were knowledgeable about Soviet history and the coverage of the Soviet Union in the United States got very concerned after the fall of the Soviet Union and all that the New York Times' correspondent in Moscow during the purges, during the 5-year plan, all this was an agent of Soviet influence named Walter Duranty, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Moscow and Stalin. And everybody now knows, everybody who knows that Duranty was writing lies about what was going on in the Soviet Union. And there was this idea that the New York Times should return the Pulitzer Prize and should remove Duranty's stories from their archives, or at least isolate them, do something or other. And the Times has refused both requests. Now imagine it's 100 years from now, and we're living in however we're living. And the New York Times, because it's the only really genuinely successful journalistic institution that has survived and thrived over the last decade, so let's assume that it continues to thrive for another 75 years, and it's the year 2100, and somebody wants to write the history of the 1920s and 1930s, and one of the extant ancient archives is the archive of the New York Times, and you want to go, and no one's left alive, and books have vanished, and all of this, and you want to go tell the story of what happened, what Stalin did, and all of that. And one of the major sources of historical information is going to be this fabricated pro-Soviet propaganda published in the New York Times. How, and you're now saying with Trump, 25 years from now, 30 years from now, somebody goes to write a doctoral dissertation on Trump, and they were just born in 2024, right? How are they going to know that the Hunter laptop wasn't disinformation? How are they going to know that Trump, I mean, they will, but in other words, the overwhelming evidence,
the record, the public record,
right. The
remains
public record will,
tainted extremely tainted by this, as well, because of the fact that there was some suppression on other newspapers like the New York Post actually running the story. You couldn't tweet the story out, you couldn't Facebook the story out, whatever. And so there really was a kind of gatekeeping. It wasn't even like, well, the New York Post of this year says this and the New York Times says this. They've made everything else disappear and leave only one side of the ledger that turned out to be wrong.
Well, this is the crisis I think we all understand that we are living at a time in which the lack of gatekeeping has created terrible problems for the continuance of our democracy and our civil discourse, that the parties no longer gatekeep. So Zoran Mamdani can end up becoming mayor of New York City and stuff like that. But it's not as though there's a reason that gatekeeping has become inefficient or bad or doesn't work. It's because the gatekeepers got corrupted and weren't keeping the gates. They were like, brigands who took over the tolling of the ferries before there were bridges, and made some people pay 15 times as much for the ferry as they made for other people. And therefore, it's not fair. And so they should be thrown into the ocean, thrown into the river and drowned, and everybody else gets to use the ferry for free. That's why gatekeeping, they killed the gatekeepers, discredited gatekeeping. But without gatekeeping, we got nothing. We're just we're like living in anarchy. And that's why you mentioned Game of Thrones. So what is it that Nick Fuentes and Tucker and Candace and all these people prove, right? It's
chaos is
Little Fingers, right? It's exactly that. Little Fingers' great line to Sansa Stark, which is chaos is a ladder. You can emerge if you were a certain type of person. You can use chaos to your advantage. People who need order to prevail are destroyed, but people who need chaos to create the rubble on which they can climb up can really profit. But I wanted to mention then, Seth, the piece that you published that is now at the top of our website about the response of the BBC, the fired people at the BBC. That was why I was so startled this week when the BBC's Director General and the head of its news division resigned in the wake of reporting on what Abe was talking about, which was the falsification of horror stories about Israel's conduct in Gaza as point one, point two about trans, point three about the editing of this Trump interview. And that I was astonished that they took the fall. Because like I say, in America, I don't think Dan Rather would be defenestrated for the Mary Mapes Texas National Guard story now. It would take too long, and the defense would be too much, and the idea would be, it's like Jimmy, there'll be a revolt by the staff, and then and everybody else will circle the wagons and all of that. But that's not what happened in London, and yet there is a sort of Dan Rather-like figure at the BBC defending himself again. Do you want to just explain that?
Yeah, I mean, Tim Davie and Deborah Furness were the two executives who resigned over the past several days from the BBC, because what had happened was the BBC had spliced together. The main thing that got them in trouble this time, let's just put it that way, is that in 2020, on January 6, 2021, the day of the Capitol riot, Trump gave all these different speeches. On the eve of the 2024 presidential election, the BBC came out with this panorama special that was about the Capitol riot and Donald Trump. And they spliced together videos, not just audio, right, of 3 different speeches he gave that showed him it was like watching a deep fake. You were watching Donald Trump say things he didn't say, or say things, he said 6 hours later, combined with what he said 12 hours earlier and whatever, to make him stand up there and say, we're going to march to the Capitol, we're going to fight, or you're not going to have a country. Okay. That was at the center of this. That was so egregious that it triggered a whistleblower complaint. The whistleblower complaint triggered a sort of ombudsman-like investigation from somebody who used to be an external advisor to the BBC. And that investigation, that report that he came up with, Prescott, was leaked to the Telegraph. And the report started with all the Trump stuff. This was a very, very big deal. But it also included the fact that they had done all sorts of manipulation on the Israel-Gaza war, and they had hidden sources. They had misled the public and their readers on whose sources were. They said someone was a journalist when really he was very obviously a Hamas fixer or something like that. And the Prescott investigation turned out to show that they knew these things were going on, essentially. Okay, right. That was the basis of this. Right. Was they understood in the midst of their coverage that they were acting unethically. That is the main accusation.
Right. In the accusation, and they resigned.
And they resigned.
As a result of the report. But this is why I wanted to highlight your your blog post from last night. So Tim Davie resigned. So you would think that's like, yeah, they got me. I got to quit because, that's bad. It's bad what happened. And I got to save the BBC from me. But that's not what he said yesterday on his way out the door.
No,
right?
he said we are the best version of what we could be, and our journalism is under attack, and we're going to have to fight for it. And he gave, it was kind of like the Wolf of Wall Street, where he was supposed to resign, and instead he gave that like rousing speech, like, I'm not going anywhere, sort of thing. That was, except he did resign, but his message to them was, I'm going to take the fall so that Donald Trump stops yelling at the BBC and we stop becoming the story. I'm going to take the fall in an attempt to make this go away, not because I feel I've done something wrong and my co-conspirators in this feel they have done something wrong, not because we need to reform our news gathering processes, but I'm hoping this will just go away and allow you guys to continue doing exactly what we've been doing.
Yeah, here's the quote. Here's the quote. We are in a unique and precious organization. I see the free press under pressure. I see the weaponization. I think we've got to fight for our journalism. I'm really proud of our work. This report was an internal report. This wasn't accuracy in media. This wasn't camera. This was an internal report triggered by a whistleblower of a quasi-governmental organization, which the BBC is, for which everybody in England pays a small tax to fund. And the internal report said that the BBC had been deliberately misleading on the Trump speech, on transgenderism, and on Gaza. And the response of the person who is held responsible and who resigned is, we're great. They're coming after us with their weaponization. I didn't write the report. You didn't write the report. Hillel Neuer didn't write the report. Andrea Levin didn't write the report. The BBC wrote the report that caused the head of the BBC to have to resign. Who's
and
weaponizing
there are no attacks on the legitimacy, by the way, of Prescott or what he undertook. There's nobody here saying there's something wrong with the methodology of the report. Nobody is even saying that. In the U.S., we have you have a special prosecutor or somebody, and then they come out and they give a report and they go, oh, this guy's corrupt. He's obviously in the pocket of the right wing, blah, blah, blah. They didn't do that. They didn't try to discredit the report or the guy. They're just attacking the people who are bringing it up.
Anyway, it's amazing because then it's self-denying. And so once again, why should anybody believe a gatekeeper? This guy was the gatekeeper. He was caught
I was just going to say, this is exactly what all these dinosaurs at 60 Minutes say when they step down. Bill Owens left 60 Minutes and he's saying it's a storied institution and it's a beautiful program and there's nothing wrong with it. And these people are trying to politicize it. And his predecessor, I forget the guy's name now, was just on a podcast I was listening to, Jeff Fager. Somebody asked him, Barry Weiss had the audacity to ask the team at 60 Minutes, why does the American public think you're biased? And do you think any changes need to be made? Don't touch it. Don't touch it. I mean, it's the same response here. Like these people all think that anybody who believes that network news needs to change or that the New York Times needs to change are, they're the crazy people.
Can I give a shout out to somebody I did not expect to be giving a shout out to ever again in life? Dinesh D'Souza. Dinesh D'Souza, who has emerged from, after having made these sort of, Trump documentaries and various other things, the Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes anti-Semitism has sort of was the last straw for he's sort of come out very hot, and he now has a must-read Twitter feed. And he did this thing. This is about something entirely not Tucker and Candace related, but this 60-minute story on Sunday, which was about how the Trump, efforts to suppress, to deal with anti-Semitism on college campuses has had terrible effects on health research. And the main person sourced in this story is a doctor at Harvard named Joan Brugge, co-director of the Ludwig Center at the Harvard Medical School. And according to her potentially life-saving research into breast cancer prevention was impacted by the funding freeze that Trump put on. She said something like, it was like a gut punch. She got an email that her multi-million-dollar grant from NIH was terminated. It was a gut punch. People are going to die. It's so terrible. She was, her chin was trembling and all of that. And I think we can all agree that if there's anything that we like in federal funding, it's research into cancer prevention and all of that. What we don't like is Harvard violating Title VI of the Civil Rights Act in relation to Jewish students. Dinesh tweets out, if this research is so necessary, Harvard has $51 billion in the bank. Send Joan Brugge a check so that the work can continue. What is that endowment for? Is the federal government the only... This is now me extrapolating off of Dinesh's tweet. But he crystallized something for me here, which is she's going on TV crying about how the federal government stopped a check for her, grant support. So you know what happens, like if you are somewhere and your friend runs out of, calls you and says, oh my God, they canceled my credit card and I'm here at a gas station and I can't pay for my gas or something like that. You Venmo them $20 or you drive to the gas station to get them out of trouble or something like that. Harvard's sitting there with $50 billion and Joan Brugge is blaming the Trump administration for freezing Harvard's funding because Harvard violated the Civil Rights Act. She can go to hell. Harvard can go to hell. Write the check. Support yourself. You're a hedge fund that looks like a college. What are you building that money for? What is it there for if it's not there to support Joan Brugge's cancer research? Or is it just that you need to get 80% of that grant so you can keep the light bulbs on? I wanted to point this out because that was the 60-minute story that I saw on Sunday when I was trying very hard to be a balanced, reasonable person and to see whether or not I thought that 60 Minutes had something of value to add. And it did, but entirely negatively here, which is that, as I say, she can go to hell, Harvard can go to hell, and 60 Minutes can go to hell too, because it also could have said, hey, Harvard's got $51 billion. Maybe they could go to the head of the Harvard, whatever that's called, the Harvard Corporation, whatever it's called, that runs the endowment, and say, why aren't you giving Joan Brugge the money? Where's the money for her lab? She's on the verge of a breakthrough. I heard no such thing.
Harvard Corporation, by the way,
the Harvard
refers to itself as the oldest corporation in the Western Hemisphere.
Well, turn me into Bernie Sanders. All of a sudden, break the corporations. Okay, no one has a recommendation.
John, I just want to say
yes,
that I was attending momentarily to Beacon work while you were ranting about that. And so I very much look forward to listening to that rant because I can tell how much, just from your affect, that I'm going to enjoy it when I tune in.
Now that is multitasking. Eliana is editing the Beacon while she's sitting here on this podcast. That is, I don't know. That's a very but thank you. Yes. So Eliana,
this is actually a hologram.
Apologies for my distraction, but I can't wait to listen to that later.
There we go.
This is actually a hologram of Eliana. If you're watching on YouTube,
it's actually that loop in the Epstein video where it looks like he's alive in his cell while they go in and kill him.
I should take on the Matt role and remind everybody to go sign up to our YouTube.
Please, yes, that's
Don't
right.
Don't even have to watch us there, as Matt would say.
Yeah, just subscribe.
Go subscribe. Help us in the algorithm. Check out our books in the background.
Yes.
In my case, they're all my husband's.
I was just going to tell you that over your left shoulder, as I've been staring at you the whole time, you have a shelf that is starting to warp.
What does that mean?
Do you see that? Okay. Over your left shoulder, there is a shelf of books, the first shelf, and it's bendy a little. It's bending. Do you guys see this? There's a little curve in Eliana's shelf.
2 shelves up from the bottom shelf that has the figurines.
There's a shelf with the figurines, and then above it is the shelf, and that shelf is like warping a little bit. This is what happens when I stare at you for an hour.
Okay.
Could be an optical illusion. Okay, well, whatever.
It could be because the books are organized from the largest books are on the outside and they get smaller as you go in. So maybe it is as Abe says.
I want to show you guys one thing before we go then, because I'm very proud of this. I was in Israel last week, as you may know, and you may notice over here I have these old album covers. I've got Eddie Fisher. I've got Elvis's Roustabout soundtrack. I've got the best of Al Jolson. And then I found in Yafo, near Tel Aviv, this is Shalom, I think maybe it's backwards, Shalom, the Barry Sisters. The Barry Sisters were a Yiddish singing duo who sang in Yiddish and recorded albums for the Jewish market. But in this case, they flew to Israel in the early 60s. Here they are on the plane. You can see them coming off the Israel Airlines plane. And then they sang Israeli songs. And I'm very proud of this. On the Roulette label, the Shalom, the Barry Sisters album. This is my junk pile here that I love so much and that everybody should. So some people are looking, and then somebody once said to me, why are you dog whistling racism by having an Al Jolson album? Because, of course, he did blackface, and therefore I'm implicitly endorsing blackface, I was told in an email about the first real worldwide superstar, Al Jolson, star of stage, screen, television, and music, or stage, screen, and music, the biggest star in America in the 1920s. But having his album is a mark of support of blackface. Anyway, recommendation: History of the 13 by Balzac. We'll be back tomorrow. For Eliana, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.